for attending. It's good to see quite a few of you here for this consultation and presentation. So for the next 3 weeks, we'll be gathering feedback from all the relevant stakeholders on the EV apartment charger scheme that we're hoping to launch later this year. And this 3-week consultation phase kicks off with this webinar today, which we're excited to talk to you about. The session is going to run for around 1 hour and 15 minutes, and it's going to be split into, I guess, three main categories. Challenges of apartment charging, the proposed scheme that we're going to offer, and then some details around public consultation, feedback, and next steps, as well as a Q&A. There is a box for Q&A within WebEx where you can ask us questions, and they will be sent directly to us, the panelists, and my colleague Anya. And towards the end of the presentation, we will collect the questions together and answer them. But if there are any technical issues as well, also drop down in the Q&A to say whether you have any issues. I should ask I guess everyone is okay. Anya, the presentation is visible. You can see me flicking through the slides on the screen.
Yes,
okay.
we can, yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so also I just want to note my colleague Graham, he was meant to do the first part of the presentation, but he's having technical issues. If he's going to join, might switch over to him. But otherwise, I'll be going through these slides myself. So just at a very high level, where we are in terms of EVs in Ireland. This is a graph that shows us kind of the uptake for the last decade and where we are today. And you can already see that even in 2021, we're only 8 months in. There's still 4 months left, and we're already have reached the levels from 2020. So we're looking at significant growth in the market, even though the number of car sales is going down overall. The number of EV sales is going up as a percentage, which is quite encouraging. In terms of the overall plan for the next 10 years, you might have seen the targets from the Climate Action Plan. They're very ambitious. The government, we're looking at between 800,000 and 900,000 EVs on the road by 2030. This is the current proposed curve of the uptake. You know, we want it to be as quickly as possible, but this is one of the more realistic scenarios. And so far here on the left, you can see that 74 million in SEAI grants have already been offered. And there is a question there of, you know, how much more do we need to invest to make sure that these targets are met. So hopefully with the new scheme we're launching, this is going to have a positive impact as well. Just as a quick background, the SEAI EV infrastructure programs that we have here. So just to note, 80% of EV charging is done at residential locations, which is the main focus of SEAI infrastructure support. So we have the home charger scheme, which is aimed at off-street driveways, where we offer 600 euros per charge point for charging at home. And for on-street parking, we have a public charging grant scheme where we give funds directly to local authorities to install on-street chargers. So even though SEAI directly doesn't help citizens and residents with on-street charging, we do so via the local authorities funds that we have with the public charging scheme. So from this landscape, I think it was obvious that the apartment or multi-unit developments, as they're called in statutory terms, are missing from the scheme, and that's where we are today. to try and promote and help. You might be aware that we're also not directly involved into the high-speed charging hubs that are being installed across the country. Those are at the moment in ESB mandate. So where SEAI is focused on residential charging, but I think with time, more and more, our efforts will have to join those of ESB and other stakeholders. But that's where we are today. Just at a very high level, in terms of some of the apartment statistics, CSO have some numbers that show us that there are 12% of units or housing units in Ireland are apartments. So it's a significant number. But it's worth noting that multi-unit developments don't include just apartments. They also include mixed unit developments that are apartments and houses. So in reality, the number of multi-unit developments that we're going to cover might be more in the region of 16 to 18%, because some of these houses might actually be houses as part of a multi-unit development complex. So the CSO doesn't have the number split like that, but we've done some research, and so we think it's quite a significant number. And you can see on the right that out of the 12% of people so that live in apartments, 20% are through approved housing bodies or housing authorities, 20% are owner occupied, and 60% are private renters. So really, these two numbers here indicate that 80% of people in apartment blocks are currently renting, which brings its own challenges to the scheme. So these are the things that we have to work with at the moment. So some of the challenges for the apartments. Multi-unit development complexes, as we call them, can be owned by residents, they can be owned by local authorities, they can be owned by approved housing bodies, they can be owned by build-to-rent companies, and so on. So they're quite varied. However, the main profile of the organization that we're targeting are these owner management companies, which we think are going to make up 70 to 80% of the applications to our scheme. So when we're referring to an owner management company, we're referring in general to a management company of these apartment blocks. But for the purposes of these slides, we've referred to them also as owner management company. But just to note that the term is a bit more varied and nuanced. But specifically looking at owner management companies that are voluntarily run and residents have to vote, you might have 80% of people not being able to vote in those annual general meetings. So if we're looking at an infrastructure project and so on, that's one of the main challenges there. And there's questions around, is EV charging infrastructure a priority for now versus fixing the roof or the lifts or any other items? Do you cover some of all of the parking spaces? If my space is not included, why should I support this? Especially if something like this is going to be funded from a common pool of money. Some of residents might say that this doesn't benefit them directly at the moment, although it might in the future. So that might create some difficulties there. So that's one of the challenges. Costs, cabling can be anywhere between 12 to 120K or even above, depending on the sizes of the property. You might need some civil works to take place. And also the cost can vary greatly depending on the cable distance. Is it underground? Is it surface car parking? Who will pay for the electricity? Who will pay for the maintenance? And then we have also assigned versus shared parking spaces. And also in terms of expandability, do you build just what you need at the moment, or do you build for growth in terms of the infrastructure that we put in place? So those are some of the challenges. And really what we want to do is we want to support with as many funds as we can or to the uptake of this. So what we hope to have is on the left here, we hope to invest anywhere between 50 to 80%, although this is just a preliminary figure. We will have to be further agreed with the department, but we hope to offer a substantial level of grants to get around all the issues that were mentioned in the previous slides. And then we expect the management companies to then come in with the remainder of the funds. And these might come from the sinking funds. For some type of organizations, it might be possible to do a loan if you're a commercial entity or a private landlord or some other type of organization. We know for owner management companies, loans have not necessarily come about easily in the past. We don't know if this is an option or not, but it is maybe a potential there. And also we have the energy efficiency obligation scheme, which is something we haven't developed fully yet, but we hope to bring into the scheme much later. So under this scheme, obligated parties are required to prove that they've made energy efficiency improvements in different buildings, be it residential or commercial. So we might see in the future that these obligated parties, which are the likes of Electric Ireland or other electricity providers, come in and actually take a little bit of a leading role in helping the apartment blocks with installing this. So this is what we want to offer in terms of capital investment, which is here on the left. But as an ongoing maintenance or ongoing charging costs, we are not directly going to be necessarily involved there in funding any of this. But just to highlight that at the moment, the most common operating cost model that we envisage is a model where the OMC provides and facilitates the electricity to be provided for the residents to charge their equipment. And this might come from the common supply where the hallway or the public lighting within the estate also comes from. The residents would charge their EVs directly from the common supply. The charge point operator would monitor and would bill each individual resident for the energy and the service. So as a resident, you are going to have a contract with the charge point operator where every month you're being billed for whatever you used. There will be a meter and the charge point itself that would monitor how much each resident has used. And then at the end of the month, that operator will pay the OMC back whatever the electricity consumption has been for that month. Although the model that we found would be the one that would have the highest chances of being taken up. It's not the only model by any means. There's plenty of other ones that could arise as part of the scheme. So we want to be as flexible as possible because different types of connecting, and there is the option of having a one-off connection to your own board. So looking at this car here, it's parked there. This resident will have his own electricity supply board. It appears to be connected to his flat, but it might be in the basement. It doesn't really matter. The idea is that you can now attach to the wire or the electricity supply of the individual apartment and take electricity out of that, which means that in this case, you're not involving the charge point operator as much as in the previous case. So you connect it to residents' fuse board in their home. It's legal now. However, the power to the apartment block becomes harder to manage if each of the individual apartments start to connect to their own connection. So we don't think this is the best model, but it's there in some cases that can be taken up. So then the second bullet point here is covers this scenario here where you have a common supply, an existing common supply in the apartment blocks, and depending on its limits and its MIC connection, so maximum import capacity connection, you might be able to allow several EVs to connect to it because there is spare capacity, and you might not see any additional charges being added to the bill for the MIC connection point of view. That would be the easiest way to get a scheme like this going. There's some spare capacity, you connect one or two EVs, but there's a limit to how far you can go with that, and in which case you need to come back and revisit it. The third option is that you expand the common supply connection, so you increase the maximum import capacity, but the annual standing charges would increase as well. And there's a question there: would these extra costs be shared by all apartments who own an EV, or would the addition apply to EV users only? Again, we don't have all of the answers. We think that some apartments might decide to do things one way and some apartments might decide to do it another way. So we would encourage any model that is feasible to occur. And then finally, there might be a need to have a separate dedicated connections for EVs only, depending on what's there available. And all of this is also mandated by the local electricity network being capable of taking this increased capacity. So in some cases, ESB or other electricity network providers might have to be involved to assess the overall capacity of the surrounding area, and if it's feasible to take this additional increase. I think this might become more of a problem as we're looking to ramp up the number of EVs into 2023, 2024. At the moment, maybe one or two EVs could connect to the existing connection, but it's a case-by-case basis where the network providers have to assess the feasibility of these connections. So next, I'm going to chat a little bit more about the funds themselves and what they cover. So the capital funding that I mentioned before, which is estimated to be at 50 to 80% subject to being agreed further and from taking feedback from this consultation, will be provided from everything from cabling and ducting, control units, communication units, constructions and installations and commissioning, and charge points. So anything that's required to get the scheme up and running. Perhaps worth mentioning here, if say a local substation is needed to be upgraded or installed by ESB or by the network providers, we're not covering that. So that is part of a different mandate, which is to do with the grid capacity of the country and so on. So we're not gonna go down to that level of funding, but within the property itself and everything to do with the property, everything will be covered. And just as a note here, operational costs are not included, which is what I've briefly discussed about before. Eligible properties, so any properties that are considered apartment blocks, but the specific terminology that we might want to use is multi-unit developments with no private off-street parking provided within the curtilage of the individual properties. So this is to highlight that where there is private street parking provided, we hope that will be covered by the home charger scheme. So this is just really completing the gap that was there. So you might have this multi-unit development here on the top right, or you might have a mixed one where you have some apartments on the right and some houses on the left. We would be covering any mix of the two. Developments that are excluded are new builds or buildings undergoing major renovations. So there is legislation currently in place that mandates that new builds or major renovations should already provide EV infrastructure, ducting and cabling for the installation of EV chargers. So that's there already. So we are not covering new builds or major renovations there. The eligible applicant type, as I mentioned, is there's a large number of stakeholders that we think will be able to apply from this scheme. Primarily, we're looking at owner management companies, approved housing bodies, local authorities, build to rent, commercial landlords, private landlords, owner occupied, resident and tenants. And others include the energy efficiency obligation scheme, which might come further down the line with the obligated parties, and also project coordinators, property management agencies. So they might act on behalf of other stakeholders. So we will allow that. And there might be others that we will see coming through that we haven't considered. And we look for feedback from yourselves to understand what we should include into the scheme. Just to put things into context, we have two tiers to the scheme, and we have tier 1, which covers everything from cabling to infrastructure to labor and construction, bulk installations of chargers at a single location, and also expanding an existing scheme. So we're looking at funding everything to do with the bulk of the work to get you going. And you'll notice here that we're also allowing, in addition to the infrastructure being installed, that as part of that piece of work, you also install a bulk of chargers at that specific location. But you don't have to. You could just choose to do the tier 1 just to get the infrastructure and then have the residents apply for tier 2, or you can choose to do it all in one. As I mentioned, 50 to 80% of project eligible costs. With one exception, the cost or the grant level for the charging unit itself will still be capped at 600 to match the current home charger scheme and to not kind of create a difference between those. But everything other than the charging unit itself will be 50 to 80% of the eligible cost. That includes the cables, the concrete to go there, and everything to do with everything up until the point of the charging unit itself. So we think this is reasonable. We don't expect the cost of the units themselves to be a lot higher. So most of the costs will be in this cabling infrastructure type work. So that allows us basically to keep a similarity between the existing home charger scheme and this new scheme. So we expect the applicant to tier 1 to be owner management companies, housing bodies, local authorities, build to rent, commercial landlords, as well as private landlords. So that's the bulk of the work. And once this is in place, we will allow residents to come via tier 2, which is really our existing home charger scheme, and with slight modification. So once the infrastructure is in place, the installation of a single charger to an existing network or a one-off connection to residents' own electrical supply. So tier 2 is an individual owner or individual resident coming in and saying, the infrastructure is in place there, I want my charger installed, I'm going to pay for it myself, I'm going to get the grant from SEAI, but I am the owner of that charger. Whereas in tier 1, the owner of the charger, of the infrastructure, is expected to be the management company or the housing bodies. So you could have scenarios where we envisage scenarios where an owner management company might say, we'll do the infrastructure work here, and we might install 2 shared chargers as part of tier 1, but any chargers assigned to private residents should go via tier 2. We don't want to own and maintain the equipment belonging to residents. But since 80% of people are renting what is the likelihood of residents wanting to own a piece of equipment that in 2 years might have to be taken from the basement and take it with them to another place? Is it better if the management companies own this equipment and they're all installed as part of tier one? Possibly, we don't know. We just make it so that any possibility is there in terms of who owns this equipment. So we're letting the decision be done at the most granular level, depending on who has the capacity to do it and who doesn't. But we think we have all cases covered with these 2 tiers. The important difference is also that under tier 2, with the current conditions, you have to have a proof of a charger of an EV being purchased. So you must be the owner of an EV. That is not the case with tier one. And the logic there is that as part of tier one, if the management companies own these charges, it means that it doesn't matter who the residents are, because if they leave, the management company can offer that service to the next resident and so on. So really there's a few differences between the two there, which I'm sure you might have some questions about. So I can talk more on during the Q&A. Yeah, so we're looking for feedback on the funding levels, and as I said, there around 50 to 80% is being proposed at the moment. But what are some of the consideration is that in the beginning you might have a very low uptake for a very high startup cost. So that's something that kind of plays into this figure that we're gonna look to fund. State aid rules, you might we might be limited by what the government and the European regulations are saying with regards to what we can give, and these might differ depending on what type of organization is applying. There's different tax treatments for nonprofit, charities, commercials, and local authorities. As I mentioned, there is regulation there in place for some of the newer builds and the major retrofits, and the VAT might or might not be recoverable, again, depending on who is applying to the scheme. Next is a sample application for tier one. So this is where the management companies come in and they look to get the infrastructure up and running. So they assess the interest and available funds. They ask the residents, how many residents are there? How many are likely to be? Are we going to want to go with shared chargers or individual chargers? Are we going to want high-speed chargers to do quick charging, or are we going to do it mostly overnight? Each apartment block will decide differently. At this point, you might contact a charging point operator installer to serve electrical roads and cable route, obtain quotes. The charging point operators might be expected to take a leading role in helping you management companies get quotes from different types of service providers, or installers. So you might need a quote from your electricity supplier, you might need a quote from an engineering company, and so on. So it could be done on an individual basis if there's capacity within the management company, or we might see that the market develops in such a way that the charging point operators themselves start to take that leading role, because they're really the experts. They know what should be done and how much capacity is required. So, but again, there's no one size solution fits all. After the quotes are received from the operators, and we encourage 2 to 3 quotes to be taken, an installer is chosen, and then an application form is submitted to SEAI for review. The successful applicant will receive a letter of offer, the grant contract, and most importantly, you should not start any work before the date of the letter of offer. That's something we do across all of our programs, so you have to have your offer in place. And then all work must be completed with payment requests and invoices submitted to SEAI before the offer expiry date, typically 12 months. Again, in the past, some of the schemes have had 6 months time. We're proposing 12 months here. We might see that it's actually more because of the different challenges with OMCs and getting votes approved via the AGM. We're not sure. We're looking for feedback from yourselves on this one. And so that's tier one. It's kind of succinct. It follows any grant application process. That there's nothing in there that is particularly different than other applications. And we also have the application for tier two, which is the residents applying for their own charger to be installed. Again, it depends, but the first resident must seek permission of owner in case he's renting and the management companies to install a charge point. And the connection can be one-off connection, as discussed earlier, and the management company should ensure no trip hazard. So this is where you connect to your own electricity supply board if it can be done in a way that it's safe and secure, or you connect to the infrastructure that the management company has put in place for you to connect to, which is the shared infrastructure. I should mention that in order for a resident to be able to apply for the charging grant to be installed, we need to have a record of that property having the required infrastructure in place already. So if you apply via tier one to get your grant to do the infrastructure, we will already have a record of you and the description of the infrastructure. So we know it's there. But there might be apartment blocks out there that already have this connection in place. They can already allow residents to connect to it, in which case you just have to tell us via registration form that our building is equipped with the necessary cabling and ducting for residents to plug in which case any subsequent applications will be allowed to go through. And then the letter of offer, there was a last step. There was the resident will apply online via the home charger scheme. The letter of offer will be issued to the resident to say that they're okay to go ahead with the work. And as I mentioned, the resident must have an EV, either battery electric vehicle or plug-in electric hybrid, registered at that address, which is different to the tier one, where you don't need proof of an EV. In tier two, you would need a proof of an EV. Recently, we've also introduced the option that company vehicles are eligible for the scheme, in which case the address doesn't have to match the resident, but a company letter is required to say that this resident, this employee is using this vehicle for 12 months. Vehicle registration cert will be submitted at the payment stage unless you're a company car. And then the resident must install the charger and submit payment request within the 6-month offer window. So this is much lower window than the 12-month for the infrastructure work, which I highlighted previously. And really, yeah, that was just a very quick stop tour of our proposed scheme. There will be materials posted online with a few more details and written summary of what I've just described. But at a very high level, the targeted opening date for applications is October 2021. The consultation period is for 3 weeks and it opens now until the 26th of August. The recording of this event, plus feedback forms, plus other materials are on our website on the consultation form. And we would very much appreciate it if you submitted to us 2 separate things. One is the consultation feedback form. So these are questions about, do you think the scheme is good? Do you think we need to be looking at it from another perspective? What are some of the things that we might need to consider? So that's just to do with consultation form. But also, we have a separate form where you can express your interest in applying for a grant. So this expression of interest is for management companies and apartment owners, or apartment owners and local authorities and approved housing bodies would actually be interested in applying to a scheme. So we don't expect charging point operators to apply to our scheme necessarily. So the expression of interest is there to help us understand what are we likely to see coming through? How many charging points are you looking to install? Are you an apartment complex of 200 apartments and you're looking to go all out in the first phase, or are you likely to do baby steps and install 2 shared chargers to start with and 5 private chargers? So we just want to capture that early expression of interest so that we're even better prepared when the scheme is launched there. And also we will publish the feedback from the consultation online, as well as any Q&As that are going to come through here today, that we'll just make everything transparent and post the answers online. So really that's it. I hope that was a good overview and not too lengthy. We've put aside about 45 minutes for a few Q&As. There might not be that many. At this point, I might hand over to you, Anya, and I know you're not an EV expert and it wasn't planned for you to do this, but if there are any questions that have come up from the Q&A that you think I could answer or look at, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a sec now. Okay, so Edward Cunningham asks, how much financial support will there be for each of the 2 schemes?
That's a good question. So for the tier 2 application is the 600 euro per charger, and at the moment there is no limit to that budget for individual chargers, and that's been the case with the home charger scheme. So for the foreseeable future, anyone can go through. For the tier 1, we will have a budget for the scheme that will be set by the Department of Transport for over a few years. Again, we hope that in the first 2 years, any applications coming through will be allowed to go through. So we don't see there being a problem with allowing the first year or first 2 years of applications they're coming through. In terms of budgets, we're looking in the regions of millions. The exact figure from the department hasn't been agreed. But we might also have a limit at an individual application level. So if the limit is quite generous, it's 200, it might be anywhere between 100,000 and 200,000, because if we've seen examples in Finland where they have had a 500 apartment block and they've gone all out in terms of preparing their network for EVs, and it cost them 250,000. We don't expect that to be the case, but if there are people out there who are really ambitious and they really want to kind of do this and prepare for the future, we might allow them to, but we don't expect that to be quite common. And this limit that we're going to impose might also be imposed at an applicant level, so not just an application level. So over 2 or 3 years, you might only get a certain amount, but it might also include a cap on, say, commercial landlords who own multiple properties, and we might not want to fund, too much of any given company, but we will accept applications up until a certain limit for everyone. These details are still being decided, and again, feedback is welcome on this.
Cool, thanks, Robert. Neil asks, when you say imported EVs, is that only BEVs or PHEVs as well?
It's PHEVs and BEVs for the home charger scheme, but for the EV grants scheme, that's a separate scheme. I think there's different rules for that, but for the home charger scheme, if you can prove you're the owner of a BEV or a FEV, be it bought outright or imported, you're eligible for the scheme.
Okay, thanks. Mark asks, can we charge for this? And if so, does this change the structure of the limited company to shares based?
Sorry, maybe you can repeat that first part again, Anya. Sorry.
So Mark says, can we charge for this? And if so, does this change the structure of the limited company to shares based?
charge for this. Okay, from the limited company. So I think there might be some information missing there, but if I can guess what the question might be is, if you're an owner management company and you are looking to charge a fee to your residents for the management or the operation of this scheme, the question is, if it's possible and your constitution allows you to do that, and if that's a way that you can get the buy-in from the residents, that the costs can be covered through that, I think all options should be explored. In terms of making a profit out of this, I don't think that's going to be allowed, and also we will have problems with the state aid rules. But having a charge there that has a legitimate purpose and it's going to ultimately be used to fund further infrastructure work into this, I think it should be possible, but depends on the constitution and the context of each company. Yeah.
Okay. Are there companies that would put this in at their cost and charge for use? That's another question from Mark.
Absolutely. If that is a model that would work, it should be explored. So I know in other countries that there might be something called charging as a service, where the charging point operators decide to provide all the infrastructure upfront and take on the costs for it, and then simply charge the recipients or the users based on what's being used. Now, there are challenges to that, because if there is no minimum guarantee level of usage, the charging point operators might not want to make that investment. So that's why maybe this model hasn't necessarily taken off yet. But as this market develops, we might see to start that being explored further. So we think it's a valid option. Yeah. In which case, they might not even come through our scheme. That might just happen completely in the free market space. Yeah.
Okay, and another, this would surely not qualify for sinking fund use.
So sinking fund, from our own research, can be used for a number of different purposes, including capital investments. So you have the owner management companies have two ways of charging, and from what we understand is, one is the regular annual fees to maintain the property and ongoing costs, and they also have charge for money to go into what's called the sinking fund, and the Multi-Unit Development Act stipulates that there should be around 200 euros per year per resident or per unit. And that goes in the sinking fund. Now, the MUG Act says that the sinking fund can be used for capital investment, but the process is that this should go through an AGM vote, and depending on the constitution of each OMC, that might mean half of the votes present, or it might mean half of all the votes. Each OMC is slightly different in that sense. But we do expect the sinking fund to be able to be used for this if the residents vote and agree to it. Yeah.
Great. So I've just included Declan Mealy there to help out with the Q&A, because Graham is having some technical issues logging in. So Declan is going to support you, Robert, on answering some questions there. Thanks, Declan, for joining us. Declan, do you want to give a little introduction to yourself for the group?
Yeah, thanks, Anya and Robert. Well done in terms of the coverage to date. So thanks everybody for joining. As we said, this is consultation. We have some general ideas in relation to the program, and have been in ongoing discussions with quite a number of stakeholders, and obviously with our own department of transport, and looking at the developments here. But yeah, we're interested in getting feedback and yeah, some interesting questions, but I'm here in terms of any questions that are coming through on it. As I said, Robert has answered them admirably there, and I think in terms of the any of the questions coming through, we can also take them written and consider responses if we can't answer them today.
Okay, so just continuing on with the Q&A, there's a question or a comment more here from Enda. Loans are currently not an option for OMCs due to difficulties in securing a charge on the common areas. So I don't know if one of you guys want to respond to that, or?
Again, it's just an interesting point to consider in terms of how they would work in relation to the securing the capital funding. But yeah, as I said, any of that feedback is useful for us to know.
Great. So Paul asks, what are SEAI's views on the charge point operator market for apartment charging services now and in the future?
Yeah, we know there are suppliers out there already doing this, and we've seen case studies of chargers being installed in apartments. So we think there is enough providers out there to get this up and running. One thing that we are considering is whether we might have an approved list of suppliers or not. That's in discussion, and again, that might be something that we would look for feedback from. But we think the market is there at the moment, and there is momentum behind this happening. So yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything there, Graham. Oh, sorry, Declan.
No, that's fine. Yeah, as I said, we are seeing market providers coming through in terms of with the charging companies. So as I said, they're looking at different models, and we're seeing different opportunities coming through in it. That's
Great.
what we based obviously your presentation on as well.
So Hugh McElroy says EV chargers in MUDs will become part of common areas at the moment. ESB networks rate common areas as DG5 business rate. This means that the price per kilowatt hour is approximately 0.03 higher than the residential price, and PSO is 3.33 times higher. This means that the OMC cannot offer an attractive rate to users of the EV charger. I have raised this issue with CRU, who are due to issue their opinion. And he's included his number there, which I'll pass on to you
Okay,
guys after
that's
the
great.
event.
And yeah, in terms of the idea around the consultation, just taking these feedbacks, that's good to know.
Okay, so a question in here from Margaret. Why does this need to be so significantly different to the household scheme? Most OMCs have no spare parking spaces. Each space is privately owned. Electric meters and main fuses are normally located in or near the car parking spaces. So car park space owners should be able to put in a charger for their own use and link to their electricity supply after the main fuse, but not up to the fuse board in their apartment. For the bulk of apartment owners, the OMC cannot provide the electricity for every space.
Yeah, that's sorry, Declan. Yeah.
No, I'll let you cover it, because I think you covered it in the presentation that it's an option there for people, but it's we've seen that it's not an option in every case. But yeah, it's certainly the opportunity, but we're seeing that there is a need to look at considering a central hub that then the apartment owners can connect into in cases here as well. So.
Okay, Mary Rafferty.
Just
sorry.
on that one, sorry. So yeah, that's a valid option, and one of the downsides, if every resident connects to their own supply, is you would have a lot of cabling running across the car park, so the costs could be a lot higher. So it's better if it's done, it's centrally managed, because costs could be kept down. And in terms of the electricity consumption, if it's centrally managed through the OMC, you can have dynamic load management, which means that you're able to very accurately control how much each EV is using, and using little spare capacity that is there, you could go much further in terms of how many EVs you can cover charging overnight. If you have every EV connected to their own supply, it means that you can't do dynamic load management, and the electricity consumption for the building as a whole might increase at peak times without the ability to restrict it. And we know that at least from the planning and expectations of the grid operators, having all EVs charge during peak times is not going to be an option. So we do have to manage it somehow because of the grid capacity of the country. So that's some of the other challenges. Yeah. Sorry. Thanks, Anya.
Okay, so a comment here from Mary Rafferty. She said this model only works with allocated parking and we have unallocated parking. Then Marion Doran asks, why would we not use a credit card for the EV charge unit?
Okay, good questions. We know there's a lot of places where there's going to be a lot of unallocated car park spaces, which is why we envisage that in that case the management companies would take ownership of the chargers, because really there no resident owns that car park space. And I guess it's down to each of the management companies to decide how to install and manage the shared car park spaces. It could be the case that once a shared charger is installed, the two adjacent car park spaces become EV only, as you see on the streets, or it could be a different model. We might see booking systems starting to be provided by charge point operators who might allow residents to book into individual slots. So we're at the very early stages of this market reaching its capacity or its potential. So we don't have the answers, but it's on a case-by-case basis. And regarding the credit card, we know that in the UK there's consultation to ask whether each charge point unit can be just pay as you go with just the card. That could be an option for if the charge point operator provides. And when looking for quotes, if some charge point operators offer that versus others that don't, that's a way of choosing who you might find works best for you.
Okay, great, thank you. So Joe Tugwell asks, in the case that you have power running from each apartment to its own charger, is it not a safety/regulatory issue that you cannot isolate power in a common area from a single connection?
Yeah, and I think that at the point is where we have to look at all of these regulatory and technical issues. Obviously, our ongoing discussions include discussions with and we'll discuss with ESB, but also Safe Electric, and looking at the regulatory issues in terms of what's possible here. And I think that's where people are getting a feel now in terms of just general feedback to the consultation. It's not a straightforward issue to be able to develop the apartment charger system. There isn't a one size fits all, but and why the need in terms of consulting quite widely now in terms of what can and can't be done. And we'll see it, as we kind of going through and the evolution of this program. May need to be modified and developed as it goes and as it evolves. So, yeah.
Great, and kind of following on from that question, Gavin McManus asks, if the electrical incoming supply/connection isn't sufficient to handle, say, 20 extra EV chargers in an apartment block, would the grant cover the infrastructure cost to upgrade the incoming supply to the MUD development or apartment blocks? Is on-site battery energy storage devices on a large scale, 0.5 to 1 megawatts, to be considered under the grant to help the incoming supply for many EV charging at the same time?
So we'll take the points in the consultation. Robert outlined as part of the presentation that no, it doesn't include the incoming supply upgrades. It's the costs within the actual apartment block. That's seen as separate, and for now anyway, certainly not what we're considering. And again, if there's smart charging solutions in terms of where these can be provided through the systems, then we'd be delighted to see those kind of things, those kind of proposals coming through. The battery, certainly not large scale. If you're talking about megawatts batteries, that's pretty significant scale in terms of battery storage, and not deemed as something that is relevant or eligible at the moment. But as I said, we look into that, and as I said, if there's any proposals as part of the consultation or information that should be shared with us, that we look at that.
Thanks, Declan. Okay, Jamie Moore asks, will detailed consultation documentation, i.e. draft policy, be published today?
Yes, we have a 4 or 5 page document effectively with all the text that I've presented today and the presentation. So between the webinar files and the PDF document that I've shared, there should be enough information there to go by, but it's in draft format. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Robert. Enda asks, are buildings undergoing refurbishment works due to building defects excluded? If so, this is missing a major opportunity. Many of the apartment buildings being targeted will need work. The Department of Housing is currently investigating the extent of the problem. It would be logical that when addressing building defects, OMCs could also upgrade facilities.
Yeah, well, it would make sense if works are being done in parallel, that these are done at the same time, and it's certainly, yeah, if there's other refurbishment works, maybe it's a good time to do it, and probably a least costly time to do it. So we don't see why it wouldn't be considered as running in parallel, but it's just that our grant itself would be is related to the EV charge points and to the work related to that.
Great, thanks, Declan. Susan Vickers asks, how will the grant be structured? A percentage upfront and a percentage on completion?
Not in terms of the upfront cost. Certainly, that's from an SEAI general policy. We can create possible milestones on it, but there isn't a payment upfront. It is on the basis of works being completed, but we could consider milestones in it.
Okay, thanks. Cormac Keeley asks, who pays for electricity under the Tier 2 model, and how do SEAI see this working?
It would be the resident. So we expect the most common scenario to be a scenario where the management companies have a dedicated connection powering the common areas, be it hallways, public lights within the car park, and so on. So we expect that in that model, that electricity supply will be upgraded to include EV chargers, or a separate EV charger connection will be made that will be paid monthly by the OMC to the electricity providers. The residents would be charged directly by the charge point operators who have billing information for each resident because they manage the chargers, and they will aggregate the funds from each of the residents each month. They will transfer that fund to the OMC, and the OMC will then, or the management company will then pay for their monthly fees. That's the most common model, but there's a lot of other possibilities. Yeah, there's no one-size solution fits all.
Great, thanks, Robert. Gavin McManus asks, OMC are not able to recover VAT. This put us at a disadvantage versus a commercial entity. Can this be considered that VAT is recoverable on EV Tier 1 installations for an OMC?
Again, it's something that we consider as part of grants, whether VAT is eligible or not. And again, it's something that we will take into consideration there. If it's not recoverable, then maybe it can be considered as part of an eligible cost, but that's something that we'll have to look at under our terms and conditions.
Okay, Marion Doran asks, if this scheme is not compulsory, it makes it unworkable from an OMS. If each apartment owner has a designated parking space, where do you put the charger? Who stops others parking in the charger area?
Well, again, it'll be one in terms of the mandatory. There is now requirements in terms of where there are certain numbers of parking spaces being provided, that these are going to have a number of EV charge points provided as well. And that's coming in, but it's not coming in immediately. It will take some time on that, so that's we're working through it. But what we want to do under this scheme is to see what can work and what is working. So we can't make it compulsory until we know within the systems what is going to work and how it's going to be developed. So we'll see this program evolve as we're developing it. In
Great.
relation, sorry, Anya, in
Oh.
relation to the second point, in terms of reserving car parking spaces and making, having parking systems, that'll be down to each of the owner management companies and an agreement in terms of what's their process within the units, and deciding, well, is it a booking system, as Robert had said before, and how is this going to actually work on it as well.
Okay, Patricia Deneen asks, hi, in terms of CP operators / installers, do you provide a list of these that operate in each county / area?
There isn't currently a list in terms of the installer. Like, again, it's quite searchable on the web in terms of EV installers and EV charge point installers, and quite a number of operators around. So they're available on the web. We don't have a dedicated list though at the moment, as I said, but that's something, again, we may see evolving as the market is developing.
Yeah, we might be able to, depending on our ability to manage this or explore, we might have just an index of suppliers on our website, but not necessarily an approved list of suppliers, but just as a small index, we could provide that. I know on other programs that's happening, so we'll explore those options. Yeah.
Cool. Simon Acton asks, will the availability of the grant be backed up by regulation to ensure OMCs have to act if requested by residents per regulations in France, for example?
And again, that's something that can be taken on board, Simon. We don't have the, I won't answer yes or no immediately, but as obviously in terms of, like any program we have, we take the feedback and look at what's the regulation required. And that's, with something not just with Department of Transport, but with Department of Housing, and who will provide, that regulation. So it's something that, again, we will consider what are the requirements as this is evolving.
Great. Roisin O'Shea asks, we have been quoted over €5,000 for a dual 22 kilowatt charging unit at our MUD. It appears from what you have said that the grant available for this is capped at 2 by €600. Is this correct? There are a few €1,000 of other installation costs, including civil works, ducting, etc., which I understand would qualify for a 50 to 80% grant.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think we were looking to see, as part of this consultation, what we will do. In some sense, there could be flexibility to increasing the €600 grant per charger under tier 1 to allow for these higher power chargers, as you said, around the 5K area. But would that create an imbalance with the other scheme that we're offering? Could that mean that there's a loophole in our scheme where going via tier 1 is always more profitable, and therefore there's no incentive for residents to own their own charger? I think we'll take that feedback on board. It's definitely one of the key, I guess, sticking points of our scheme that's currently been designed. Is that a good idea or not? So I think hearing your thoughts there is really good on that sense. So please do submit to our feedback. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Anna Lawler says, thank you for the presentation. A few questions. One, is this presentation the main consultation document, or is there another document to view? I think you've answered that already. We have commenced the process of completing an SEAI Sustainable Energy Community. Would it be suitable to include assessment and application for the EV charging for MUD developments as part of this process? And then question 3 is, I didn't fully understand about the energy efficiency obligation scheme when it comes to MUD development. Does it relate just to common area supply?
Well, just to, so I think with the 3 parts of the question, the first one, yeah, there is, as you said, it's already answered. There is other document just outlining in terms of what the proposed structure is been set up. In terms of linking with the SEC, yes, consider it as part of your SEC and even your energy master plan, looking at, what are the needs, what are the requirements there. And then in terms of the energy obligation scheme, what we're considering and what Robert was alluding to as part of the presentation is that the energy suppliers are obligated in terms of providing energy efficiency opportunities, and that they, in terms of having discussions with your energy supplier, that there may be opportunities for them to be involved and perhaps support this. But that's what we see as the program evolves. As I said, it's not considered the case at the moment, but it's still worth consultation and discussions with the energy suppliers anyway.
Great. Mary Rafferty says, will you circulate these forms to those attending this event?
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
Brian Maher has kind of a similar question. Will a list of approved installers be provided so that OMCs can be satisfied that any proposed spend will be covered by the grant schemes? So that's something we've kind of responded to before.
Yeah.
Sean Welsh says, I'm finding it hard to get my management company to enter into a discussion on private EV charging tier 2. Any advice on this?
Again, it's making them aware that there's a tier 1 opportunity, and in terms of the discussions ongoing and the consultations out there to consider enabling these the tier 2 grants. So that's why we want to get the consultation out, so that OMCs and see, there were other recommendations in terms of linking with housing agency and other bodies, which we are doing. There's consultation outside with direct with stakeholders, but from this, in terms of bringing it to their attention that there's consultation ongoing, and also in relation to the requirements that if there's parking space has been provided for apartment blocks and open spaces, that there's regulation coming down the line in the next number of years that they're going to have to do it anyway. So they may as well be part of the discussions.
Great. Aon Fitzpatrick says, what is the criteria to determine a new build development?
That's a good question. There is, as of last month, or actually 30th of July, there is a translation of a European directive around what consider new builds and major renovations, and it's included in the PDF document that will go up with this consultation on the website. Yeah.
Right. Joe Tugwell asks, what are the factors that decide whether the grant is 50% or 80% or anything in between of the budget?
Again, we're looking at the financial analysis in terms of just getting some ideas as to the likely level of costs and understanding, and what Robert put up, that we have to look at state aids, we have to look at different criteria to make a final determination, and in agreement, obviously, then discussions with the department and all that in terms of the final levels and final amount. But just we've given an indicative. We want to, certainly at the early stages, give as much support to this area as possible. But as I said, we'll be taking all of those factors into account.
A comment here from Cormac Healy. He says, for Dublin City new development plan proposing that in all new developments a minimum of 20% of all car parking spaces shall be equipped with fully functional EV charging points. The remaining spaces shall be designed to facilitate the relevant infrastructure to accommodate future EV charging.
Yeah. Thanks, Cormac, for that. Yeah.
Gavin McManus says, looking at the SEAI website, I'm unable to see the forms with the web link provided. Are the forms live yet, or will they be posted after this event?
We were waiting for this, for this event to finish, and they will be there by 2 or 3 p.m. this afternoon. Yeah.
Susan Vickers asks, is there a consideration to increase funding for AHBs to 100%?
No, not at the moment. And in terms of it, the grant level has been pitched in terms of what's there and what will come through. So not at the moment, no.
Neil Briscoe asked, isn't there an issue with transparency and accountability when it comes to landlords and management companies? How can it be ensured that only the appropriate costs of chargers and charging are passed on to residents?
Well, again, that's what we want to see in terms of how they're proposing to actually charge, and the pass-through costs when the infrastructure goes in, and how is it going to be managed. So we need to understand that as part of the application.
We have been talking to equivalent bodies in the UK, and they have done some research into this. They were wondering the same questions. They have found that even though they haven't explicitly said what charges everyone should be charged to make it fair, they found that the market or the residents were being charged a fair price, and there were very exceptional cases where there wasn't a fair price. So there might be pros and cons to being too prescriptive about what OMCs should and can do. But if there are issues, we'll obviously intervene, and I guess we'll see with time. Yeah.
Great. Mar Tuberty says, great presentation. Thank you so much. Very informative and helpful. For MUDs without individual designated parking spaces, will they be excluded, i.e. all parking is shared by residents? I suppose that's something we've addressed previously.
Yeah, no, they doesn't have to be dedicated parking, and it is just looking that there is car parking spaces, and that it wouldn't exclude them, as I understand it at the moment.
Great. Anthony McClory says, I'm a director on OMC for small multi-unit complex, approximately 30 apartments. I'm on my second EV, and it is great news to see support for chargers. Is there supporting documents that could help persuade apartment owners who are not yet using EVs that I could use at our upcoming AGM to help get buy-in?
Well, we have information on the website, and whether you use drivingelectric.ie, it takes you to SEAI website, but there's the car EV calculator and car comparator to look at, when people can really see what is their total cost of ownership and the information that's available there in relation to running an EV versus running a internal combustion engine, petrol or diesel. So that's only very recently been launched. And I think, again, what we're seeing as well is that, word of mouth and the simple message being do the maths in terms of what it costs to actually own one and run one versus a petrol or diesel. So from the uptake and what we're seeing through the grant scheme, which is fantastic, there's great word of mouth. And I know Simon Acton had a question there, but also the EV owners, the Facebook and the information there, and the the great feedback in terms of EV owners as well is also there in terms of assisting. But definitely on the website, the information there that we have now that has helped and guiding people to that.
Great. David Connolly says, great to see this scheme coming. Thanks. If you want to install an individual charger now without getting tier 1 infrastructure, what do you need to show that the existing infrastructure is okay to use?
That's a good question. I think depending on whether you connect to your own supply, no documentation will be, you need approval from your owner if you're renting and your management company to say that they are happy. That will only be coming into play in the next few months when we launch the updates to the scheme. If you're connecting to the infrastructure of the building, all we need is the OMC or the management company to submit a survey to ourselves, which we'll provide soon, to say we confirm that we have this much spare capacity for EVs, and therefore we will know how many EVs, at least in principle, we might be able to fund with that. So there's two different avenues there. Yeah.
Great. Trevor Sweeney says, our apartment block in the estate has 7 apartments and parking is not assigned, and parking spots are outside, not in the basement of the building, and the parking spots are under the management of DLR. How would we go about getting EV units in place?
Again, with that one, if it is linked to the local authority, then we have a grant aid to local authorities where they don't have or where they have the opportunity in putting in public charger. That's one option for you to consider and have the discussion with the local authority on that basis. And that's the, again, for those that don't have dedicated off-street parking, but where they need to have on-street. But it's an initial, worth having an initial discussion, because we could and do. We've often started offering grants and to local authorities that are considering that, and it's primarily aimed at people that are living on streets that don't have parking. But it sounds like it's if the local authority have those parking spaces in their charge, then it's the equivalent of a street area and could consider under the public charger grant scheme. But that's one to have a discussion with them.
Great. Patrick Moore asks, does Tier 1 support extend to the charge points if they are installed in a shared parking space?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jason Cross asks, I'm a landlord of an apartment. I have an EV and have already installed a point on my private residence availing of the grant. Will I be able to avail of the grant again to install a point on the apartment complex property, or do I have to buy a second EV first?
We are trying to be flexible with Tier 1 applications to allow private landlords to do a bulk installation of several EV chargers if they own one or two more properties in an apartment complex, which doesn't require that each installation is tied to a particular charger. So I think you should be able to come under our scheme via Tier 1 there, but we are thinking that's more aimed at a bulk installation. We haven't defined what bulk means yet, so we're hoping to do that as part of this consultation. So it may or it may not be covered. We'll have to decide. But thanks for the feedback. We'll consider that. Yeah.
Okay, Margaret Good asks, if I have an EV, live in an apartment and already have a privately owned charger installed linked to my supply with permission from the OMC, but didn't get an SEAI grant previously because none was available to apartment owner occupiers, can I now get the installation grant in retrospect?
No, the grants are not. The grants are designed to incentivize the works to happen, and which is why we always have in principle that no work start until you get your offer, but there's no retrospective grant available.
Okay, Jerry Cash has a comment here. EasyGo already provided charging as a service model in Ireland. Michael Sheridan asks, charger technology is rapidly improving. Will there be a minimum standard of charge point, e.g. 7 kilowatt per hour minimum, etc.?
Again, yes, we'll be looking at the standards, but I think it would be that it'd be the 7 kilowatt. But again, in a lot of with these, they can scale up and scale down in terms of the flexibility of the chargers. But from the idea of setting standard, like the standard and the safety standard have been set, is obviously set with the safe electric standards, which is what we operate to. But in terms of the charging ability, again, it's not decided yet whether it would be only down to 7 kilowatts.
God, it
may be appropriate that it could scale down as well to that too. Okay. Robert, I don't know whether you want to add anything to that.
No, that was a good answer. Yeah, I think Anya said she might. Oh, Anya is back. Can you hear us, Anya?
Yes, I'm back. Thank goodness. My internet went for a second there.
No problem. I don't know how when we announced it, whether we said it was going to be a quarter past finish, or do we have more questions, or do we wrap it here and answer?
Yeah,
well, what we can do is we can just take one or two more on it, Anya, and then we'll take note of those as part of the consultation and the questions that come in. And we can,
so we'll be downloading a report of all of the questions submitted during today's consultation. So if we haven't had a chance to respond to your question, we will be addressing it down the line. But we'll try to take a few more now. I think we can go until 12:30 anyway. So Adrian asks, can this grant scheme be used in conjunction with a solar panel grant scheme to allow utilised cost of electricity?
Well, again, the grant in itself will be just the application for the EV charger. If people are going for the solar grant and are eligible for that, they can do. So that's not an issue once they're eligible to go for that grant. Yeah, that's fine. Like we would anticipate that people would consider that those options. And in terms of when is their charging time, if they're charging during the day and they're operating from home and they're getting the use of the solar panel, then that's great.
Mike asks, can the CPO claim the grant 50 to 80% when installing to OMC?
I'm not sure I understand what CPO.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, I think it's CPO, charge point operator. We don't expect the charge point operator to apply to our scheme directly. Is there a scenario where you might want to take on the full cost of it and claim back just 50 to 80%? Certainly, I guess I'm not sure. We haven't considered that, but that would involve the operator taking on board certain costs. I don't know, Declan.
Yeah, and again, it's something that we would consider in terms of the application if they're acting as a project coordinator on behalf of the OMC. But that's again something that we'll have to consider within the rules of the program as to whether that's allowed.
Margaret Good has a comment here. At least 80% of MUDs in Ireland do not have sufficient money in sinking funds to cope with essential one-off repairs, so it's not likely to have anything available for EV charger installation.
Yeah, and it's a good comment, Margaret. And again, it's something that we have considered, and also again, as part of this consultation, we want to hear what is possible on it. So from the perspective as well, that we're saying that they may not be able to take down loans. Again, we have to look at how these can be financed.
And we might just take one more question and then finish up. Jamie Moore asks, are there plans to roll out other energy grants to OMCs currently targeted at dwellings or houses?
Well, we have the home charger grant. So that's the if you're talking about other availability in terms of energy upgrades, they are available through our website. So our communities grants, which opens call each year, we've done numbers of apartments or group schemes and all that as well. So for insulation, heat pumps, in terms of those energy upgrades, so they are available. So if they want to consider our website.
Okay, well, we're just approaching 12:30 now. There are loads more questions, but we will extract all of those questions and we'll work on covering and responding in an FAQ document to you all. Thanks so much to everyone for attending. Apologies for the couple of technical issues we had over the course of the event.
Yeah, we're delighted with the attendees. The numbers have been excellent. We have some up to 140 there or more. So lots of interest, and yeah, we're really looking forward to getting the feedback to help us and Department of Transport in terms of the final design, and certainly kicking this off and starting the rollout later on in the year.
Thanks again, everyone, so much for attending today, and we will be in touch with the recording of the event and the relevant documentation with everyone that's registered today.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Great.
Thank
you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
And thanks, Anya and Rob.